Okay, this is Kent Kidwell with Renewing the Renaissance and the Beginner's School. We're going to go through and watch this video at a 5 times speed. The reason we're doing that is it'll give us a chance to see the details being developed in the piece, and that way you don't have to wait the 6 hours through the whole video to watch the piece being developed. So right here we're again going through the geometry of the piece where we've done the measurements, and I'm just double checking the measurements on that. Remember the width of the nose there, the point of the eyes, the width of the nose at the nostrils is the same as the width of the eyes. So I'm making those measurements down through the center of the face again, so that as I start to develop the details, those things will be all aligned and my symmetry will be correct. What my tool is doing is actually pulling away material. You can kind of see that it starts to hang off the tool. All that's doing is just scratching away small amounts of material, and then it's also leveling the surface because I'm using the flat side of the tool so that I can create a smoother surface and remove any bumps and texture that is on the surface of the piece. I'll go heavier in areas where I want to remove material, and I can add a little bit and pull it back away again, and add the fatty tissue and the different spots that create character and make the face a little bit more realistic. I can just use my finger to smooth out the textures on it a little bit as I go. You can just see how the piece is starting to refine itself out a little bit. You get the little bit deeper lines and creases, and I'll bounce around a lot in this. You'll see me going from the nose to the mouth to the eyes. I like to develop a piece as a whole, not so much sticking with one part individually and focusing on that one part, because I believe that all parts of the face kind of tie into each other. As you develop one part, it's good to keep an eye on the other parts as well, and move along the entire piece if you can at the same time. You also want to make sure that you're taking the time to look underneath the nose to make sure your nostrils are shaped properly, and I'll be doing that soon. But basically, you want to make sure you're seeing everything at every angle, because at some point when you're going to cast the piece, you'll see those little flaws like underneath the chin, so don't forget those spots. There we go. And the notch of the lip right above the top lip. Just not forgetting those little teeny details that really make it super realistic in the end. I'm going to start working on the eyes soon. I'll start to define the sockets out, and also define the shape of the eyeball itself and how it sits into the head. Especially from a profile side, if you look at a lot of profiles, you'll see you can see how far the eyeball extends out, and you can look at the angle of how that eyeball sits in the eye socket, and super important, especially if you're trying to create a look of intensity or whatever, to know how far to make the eyeball set in the head, and really watching also around the eye when it comes to the cheekbones and the eye socket area and the bones around the eye, to make sure that they're symmetrical on both sides. And if the eye is turned to one side or the other, to the left or to the right, it's going to also change the symmetry a little bit of the tissue around the eyes, like the eyelids and stuff. So as we get going through this, we'll see if we can't develop the eyes to show that. Refining the nostrils out, making sure I use my reference material, if I have some, for creating the nostrils, making sure that the rounded portion and the lines around the nostril are correct as well, so that it looks accurate. And adding some depth underneath the nose and the crease around the nose, shaping out the nostril. You can see that the neck area on my piece originally was a little thin, so I'm going to add some muscle structure and thickness, so the little fatty tissue underneath the chin. Again, as you're developing a piece, you'll notice that there's you get into a rhythm and the character starts to develop. Sometimes it's good to just experiment and and find different ways of making the character look more interesting. And that's really the fun of sculpting, is creating a character that has character. And as you can see, I wanted to have a little bit more shoulder space, but also I wanted to add a little bit more muscle texture, and also just a little thickness to the neck. as I was developing this piece, I hadn't come up with any kind of theme or anything at this point. But as I saw the countenance of the character, and I decided I was going to make it a Roman senator. So as you'll see that start to develop later on, but you can. The reason I did that is just the character just looked that way. So that's again part of the fun of sculpting, is coming up with different characters and doing whatever you feel inspired to do. The tool I'm using right now, if you can see it, is a loop wire with a scraper surface on it. Basically what that is just a sharpened kind of flatter surface, and it helps me get rid of the bumps and lumps, and takes away quite a bit of material as well. Since I added material around the neck area, I needed to refine that a little bit. So that's a quick way to get a lot of clay off the piece. And refining the jawline and taking away extra fatty tissue around the cheeks, just give them a little more gaunt look, but also refines and defines the musculature of the jaws. Also important too, as you're developing your piece, to try and look at it from all angles, because although you might have what you want from the front angle, the side of the piece may not be as developed as the front. So watching your profile and really catching the piece from all angles, it helps to develop the piece on all planes and all sides. And so as somebody's walking around the piece, they'll see little details, but also they'll see that the piece has got character from all angles, and that's important when you're dealing with sculpture. It's also one of the great parts of sculpture is the fact that you can see it from all angles. And one of the things that I like about sculpting is that I don't have to try and create perspective like you would if you're doing a painting, working on a two-dimensional surface. Sculpting is a 3D art, and so you get to see it from all angles and develop the piece from all angles. In some ways it's easier, but in some ways it's also harder because you're having to pay attention to all sides. really enjoyed sculpting eyes because there's so much going on there. You have, to me, it's the focal point of any face, and it's where so much character is developed, and also mood and disposition and everything can be developed through the eyes and the mouth are the two most expressive parts of the face. And when they work together, you really see character develop. And so paying attention to not only the bone structure of the eye, but how the eye is showing emotion and is also important. Instead of just doing an eyeball with a lid and with the eyebrow, you really just have to focus on, if he was looking at you, what is his expression trying to portray? What is that look trying to say to you? Because as we know, there's so much information given to us from just a look. You can sometimes tell if somebody's angry, happy, frustrated, whatever, just from a look on their face. So, and then also how that plays into other parts of the face as well, like the mouth and so. If you're new to sculpting and you're watching this video, maybe for the first time seeing a sculpture developed, you're probably wondering why there has to be so many passovers from my tool, but it really is just refining and just making and pulling away material and softening and smoothing the surfaces. And that's so much of what you wind up doing as a sculptor, is going over the piece many times. And as you can see, I'm starting to develop the brow line, and because I've got that kind of stern look on his face, I've decided to carry that also into the eyebrows, which again is part of that. Everything works together on a face, so matching the mouth and the eyes and the eyebrows and how the face is during any kind of specific emotion is so important. You can see I've pulled the eyebrows down a little bit to kind of create either concentration or a stern look. I suppose you could interpret this one a couple of different ways, but I think it is starting to develop itself as more of a firm look, or one of deep concentration. And I liked the way that was looking, so I went ahead and developed the piece in that way. Also, when you're learning your anatomy, it's super important to remember that there's more than just one aspect of anatomy. It's not just the musculature. It's really, you have to look starting with the bone structure, and then from the bones to the musculature, and how the muscles play, how thick they are in the face or in whatever part of the body you're sculpting. But also, as you're developing a sculpture, whether it be a figurative work or a portraiture like this, that you remember that there's the bone structure, and it moves into the musculature and the fatty tissue, and then the skin itself. So those 4 layers, you have to be thinking about those as you develop your piece, because the skin, of course, is going to be most affected by age and weight, and then some of it's going to be texture, but mostly age and weight. And so this being a fairly lean character, I don't have a lot of saggy skin or anything, but I do have, it does pull closer to the musculature and also the skeletal structure, because he's not got a lot of extra tissue, extra fatty layers or anything like that. So but it's important as you're doing these kind of studies to try and take on as many characters as you can, and some of them having extra weight on the face, super thin, maybe saggy flesh, aged flesh. All those are important to practice, and it will give you a chance to learn how the face universally plays out, or even the body when it comes to sculpting. That some areas the fat just tends to pool up around the cheeks, next to the sides of the nose. Even though this is a lean character, he will still have those pockets of tissue, and it plays pretty close on just about everybody. So getting used to those kind of subtleties will make your characters more developed. So this is definitely an art form that requires a lot of repetition to get good at, and to have successfully dynamic pieces. I think it's important that you plan to do many portraitures and work on certain areas like the hands. It's also a very difficult area for a lot of artists, is doing hands, because they ever changing in their form, draw them out a lot. What I would say the most important thing for sculpture and preparation for sculpture is to do a lot of drawing. And it gives you a chance to learn anatomy and stuff from all different angles as you're drawing them, so that when you start to sculpt, it becomes easier to develop the pieces. I'm starting to develop or refine the shape of the eyeball, and also the skin around the eyeball, the lid, and how those play into that. So I'm trying to keep in mind that there are 2 spheres, and that we're only seeing a portion of those spheres. So you have to imagine how that ball shape will travel inside of the head, how the shape will round. If it's too small, or if the diameter of the circumference of the ball of your eyeball is too small, it'll make the character's eye sockets look too big for the ball itself, and it gives you that kind of beady-eyed look. So it's really important that you match the shape of the eyeball to the shape of the socket and the bone structure around it. So, and then you can also, as you get through that part of it, you can start to develop the fatty tissue and the age marks that will also get developed around that. So. What I'm doing right now, as you can see, as I have developed the eyes out a little bit more, of being a more serious look, I'm now going back to the mouth area, and I'm drawing out a little bit more line around the expression on his mouth to match the eyes a little bit closer, because I want to bring out that impression of a serious attitude or a stern look. So. Notice I'm bouncing back and forth from one ear to the other. I'm doing that to make sure that my symmetry is correct, that the top of the ear is in line with the eyes and where they sit. And although we already covered the geometry of that, it's really important to make sure that you're doing things like the eyes, the ears, things that there's two of, and making sure that your symmetry is correct. And the distance from the eye to the tip of the ear, the distance from the top of the ear to the bottom of the ear, all those different things are important that they match equally on either side. And you can add character to a piece, but you have to do it on both sides with those duplicative parts like the eyes and the ears and the eyebrows. Again, you can see how I'm bouncing from place to place in this. A lot of times you'll see sculptors that start this process, they tend to focus really hard on one or two areas, and then the composition as a whole kind of because it's slightly degraded because of that, because you're not developing the piece all at once. A lot of times in Michelangelo's work, if you've ever had a chance to look at his sculpting, you'll see that he develops a block of granite, or excuse me, of marble. He develops the piece on many angles and tries to look at the composition as a whole block and pull away that material until the piece starts to develop all the way around. And then once he gets the general shape of it, then he'll start to refine it down. Well, the same process is here. We're trying to pull the whole piece together as a whole and not just one individual section. The whole composition will look better if we do that. Fairly soon we'll be able to, after we get the eyes done and the ears done, add small wrinkles and textures to the skin. This particular piece was intended to be more fine art and not so much like a wax museum type piece. It just was designed to be a fine art representation of a head, and a lot of times a little bit of texture is okay, especially if it's going to be cast in, say, bronze or even other kinds of materials. It's not necessary to make the piece, so refined that you're getting skin texture, like the small pores and things like that. We're just trying to develop this piece out so that you see a really cool representation of a human head. Interesting form. So I'm not going to take it down to that 2%. I'm going to try and to leave the the essence of sculpture there, so you can see that there's lines and things in there. It's not so necessary that I bring it down to that level. Gone ahead and grab a really fine tipped tool, scraping tool that I have there. It has a flat surface and like a flattish blade on it, and it's really good for making little details and creating smaller, thinner lines and creases, and also to smoothing out planes like the eyes. As I scratch those away, I want them to be nicely rounded and even on both sides, but you can also see how I'm able to get underneath the eye brow and create a sharper line there using that tool. As a sculptor, you start to recognize, especially when you're spending a lot of hours sculpting, you start to become very attached to specific tools. So as you start to sculpt, have a good group of tools that you use, and then you'll notice you'll start to wander back to the same tools, the ones that you really, really are getting the kind of look you want from. So you can see I skipped to more of a scoop there to pull away material, but it also has a sharp angle on the tip. But I've had some tools, like the one I was previously using for 20 years plus, and it almost feels like an extension of my hand, you know, I've been using it for so long. And if I lost it, I would be in a real panic. So it's just something you kind of grow close to. I added a little bit of clay there, you can see, because I wanted to develop the eyelid, and also that little bit of material that hangs down, or a little bit of tissue that hangs down over the top of the eyes as you get older. That adds a lot of character to the eyes. As you can see, I'm back to that one tool again. Again, it's really good at drawing out lines and creases and refining. I'm adding a little bit of fatty tissue underneath the eyes. Trying to place this character somewhere in the late 30s, early 40s maybe, which means that he'll have a little bit more of those kind of age marks and a little bit more defined bags under the eyes as you get older. That becomes more refined. The lines on the forehead, the creases, smiles, and facial expression get more dug in, and they stick around. Whereas if you're younger, of course, your skin is more pliable and flexible. Those lines don't usually stay until you start getting older. Again, still always continuing going back and refining the socket area, using the natural form of the muscle and the bone structure to determine the shape of the bags under the eyes and the lines and the creases. Keep in mind everything works together. Refining the nose out a little bit. Now, referring back to our ear lesson, you'll start to develop that 9 shape. And pulling away the material necessary to create that look. Once I have the ear roughed out, I'm going to go ahead and go to the other side and match what I've done. As you can see, my geometry line there that goes down the center, or excuse me, as you're looking at the side profile of the head, you'll see that line drawn downward, and that the tip of the curl of the ear starts at that point. Again, these are general measurements, and they're not exact for everybody. Some people, everybody's head is slightly different from one another, but generally speaking, they land in somewhere in that region. So those reference points and geometry lines that we're showing there are really just based on averages, and so you have the power to adjust those slightly, depending on the person you're trying to sculpt or your own personal feeling. As long as you stay close to those points, though, you'll have a much more believable piece when you're finished. Also, if you'll remember that the ears, if you follow the eyebrow line back and then the bottom of the nose, that's the space you're going to be developing your ears at. So right now I'm going to get into doing the hair, and I was able to pull up a little bit of reference material on how Romans did their hair, and at this point I'm pretty much sure that's the direction I was going to go. So this is clay sketching. Really, you can see it much faster in this kind of a setting at 5 times speed, but it's almost like you're just drawing and you're sketching in hair, and that's exactly what I'm doing right now. It's just getting the bulk of the hair, the thickness of the hair, the material in there, and then I can start to direct the hair and how it flows on the head. A lot of sculptors like to just do almost what I'm doing right now as being the finished kind of hair, where they just bulk it in roughly, and to kind of give the I almost look at it like it's interpretive. It's like an impressionist using a paintbrush loosely and throwing a lot of paint on and creating the blurred look of where these where the hair would be or whatever. So it's you can see some sculptors use that kind of impressionistic style when they're sculpting, where it's not necessarily super refined, but you get an idea of what they're trying to show you. If you blur your eyes, it looks, or step back, it does look like hair. Whereas I'm going to refine this out a little bit. I'm adding a robe, kind of a toga. Now I'm taking my my tool and I'm pulling the hair in the direction that I want it to go. Again, I'm not creating every individual hair. I'm more working in small clumps of hair. When you're adding hair as well, you want to make sure you're paying attention to how the how the hair parts, the natural parting of the hair, where the hair follicles direct the hair. You can see that how do you that the direction of his hair coming off of his scalp. You can see that how he's pulled it forward, and so you can see how I'm trying to pull that hair forward from the back of his head a little bit to create that hairstyle that you see often represented in Roman art. Adding a little bit of lines on the neck. Again, these are going to get softened. I'm going to use a paint thinner or any kind of a solvent typically will work. Paint thinner, naphtha, acetone maybe. Just test it using a soft brush as you finish up your details and you like where it's looking and like where it's going. You can go in and add a little bit of that those mineral spirits to smooth the clay, and we'll do that in a minute after I've developed the hair out a little bit more. As you can see, we're starting to come to the end of this piece. I'm just going to look at it again from all angles, try and see areas of weakness, make sure that I'm not missing something, but in general, I'm pretty happy with how it's all coming out at this point. Does kind of remind me of a senator guy. So now I'm going to go ahead and refine it out using mineral spirits. And the more that you brush this material on, or brush the mineral spirits on, the more material pulling away from it. It's a very thin layer, but it is enough to actually take away details and stuff like that. So you want to be careful. Make sure you use a nice soft brush, and that you're not spilling the material on there. You're just using just enough to kind of coat the surface, and then soften those little lines and stuff. You can see the details, little scratches in the neck and stuff start to become a little bit more refined as well, and look more like real wrinkles rather than just scratch marks on the surface of the clay. So some areas will require more brushing than others. Going back and adding little details, and I'll come back with the brush again, little lines and things. Okay, there we have it. Roman senator. Hope you enjoyed our study of the human head, and we really enjoyed having you watch this, and we hope we can use it in your studies and help you in your path to getting better as being a sculptor. Thanks again for joining us with the Beginner School on Renewing the Renaissance, and hope you'll come back again and again. Thank you.